tried to change one life, and if you've helped one person or one woman of color help navigate into her career progression, that's worth it, I would say. And of course, if you multiply that with number of women leaders, we would have made a huge impact. We all have the responsibility to do something about it as well. And let's do those little things to help the society.
Hello everyone and welcome to Diversifying Data. I'm your host, Rakhi Sharma. And today is a very, very special episode for me for several reasons. I think to set context, on previous episodes of the podcast, we focused on the experiences of being a woman in data and technology. We've shared first-hand accounts of lived experiences, covering gender bias, discrimination, overcoming barriers, building careers, experiencing successes, alongside champions and allies. But I think too often, and I'm guilty of this, what I talk about when I talk about women in data is grouping them as if we're all the same and all our experiences are the same, which is simply not true. There's echoes of similarity across our shared experience as women in data. But we also have to acknowledge that there's a combination of factors that make each person completely unique and also contributes not only to the way they see the world, but their experiences in the world. So, example, the stories of a woman who is white and a story from a woman who is from a minoritized ethnic group likely to vary. Stories of and experiences of an able woman and a woman with disability may also vary. Women as a group are not a homogenous group by any means, and there is data to support this, and we are going to share that with you later. There's actually a word which describes what I've just been talking about, and that word is intersectionality. Intersectionality is about understanding that the social categorisations that make up the who's who of a person can't be treated in isolation because they are all interconnected. If this isn't quite making sense to you yet, today's guest I am so excited to have on the podcast, and she's definitely going to help us paint the picture, set the scene on why intersectionality is, I think, one of the more underlooked elements of being a woman in data or being from any marginalized or underrepresented community in data. So I would love to hand over to my wonderfully esteemed guest, Neeraj Goel Mittal, who is the Global Head of Data Analytics and AI at ViiV Healthcare. Welcome to the podcast, Neeraj.
Thank you, Rakhi. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. Would you like to sort of introduce just your background, how long you've been in the field, an accomplished woman in the field of data and technology?
Thank you for the brief introduction. If I look back, I normally split my career in two parts, basically. The first inning of the career was mostly consulting firms. I was very loyal to IBM Technologies, worked with IBM Technology business partners. Basically, in those days, there was a thing that these consulting firms had to be the IBM business partners to be able to showcase their solutions or sell IBM solutions. So I worked with all these boutique consulting firms who were focused on IBM technologies. I sort of was certified in so many, IBM technology certificates and technologies, etc. And in those days, IBM would use my team as the front end for demos of their products or for their tenders and everything else. So that was the first inning of my career. Really enjoyed kind of going to different clients and versatility of the work which we did actually.
Right.
And never thought I would move away from consulting, just one thing when you're doing, etc. And then came a phase when my husband moved to the UK. It was around 22 years back. And I remember, no, I'm not going to join him actually, because in my last role, when I was back in India, I was heading an offshore development team for a Singapore-based company.
Wow.
And I was kind of, doing well in my career, didn't want to leave that. And I remember I did tell my husband that I don't want to join him, so he came on his own.
I want to ask separately how that went, but that's maybe for another time.
Exactly, yeah. So my daughter was pretty young that time. She was a year and a half. Finally I made a decision to join him, basically. And funny enough, I did get a job offer from a client who I was working from on the other side of the table. But then I made a decision to work freelancing because I wanted to look after my daughter. So took a little break in the sense that did freelancing, and then joined did pharmaceutical. That was, the first. I got to join a pharmaceutical. In those days, it was Abbott, which was spun off and became ViiV Healthcare. Worked there for 12 years in different roles. And since then, actually, I've been stuck with pharmaceuticals. I mean, there's something about being patient-centric, something about the whole working with pharmaceuticals. Within AbbVie, worked for around 12 years, then Ipsen Pharmaceuticals, and then GSK, ViiV Healthcare. Really enjoyed different roles and working with different people, and it has been a journey actually. Really good actually.
I mean, that's the incredible thing is you hear the title Global Head of Data, Analytics and AI, and you know that there's been an incredible journey to get there. Nobody just gets that title without having different pivots in their career, different jobs, different elements, climbing that ladder, etc. But today, in light of talking about intersectionality, you're obviously an Indian woman. You've obviously moved from India to England. And I guess those different elements of it, as a woman, moving to a different country, all of the different elements that go along with that make you who you are and make your experience very unique in, let's face it, quite a white male dominated field. And I can't imagine 22 years ago when you moved here. Do you mind sort of maybe painting a bit of a picture of your version of the intersectionality that is quite unique to you?
Of course, yeah. Just to kind of reiterate that anything I say is my personal opinion and nothing reflective of my current organization or previous organization in that sense. It's just my perspective and my experience, etc. Now, intersectionality is a word, to be very, very honest, I came across myself only a few years back, actually. And I really found it interesting because I know that sexism and racism I was facing in this country in different forms and shapes, sometimes very subtle, which is very difficult to articulate, and sometimes very visible. But then I really thought it's an interesting concept because in different forms and shapes, it becomes the double threat in a way for women like us. So one thing which I can definitely say that, because as I say, first inning of my career in India and then my second inning in the UK, what I saw, and which is very strange when I tell people, as a woman in India, my career progressed very smoothly. And in my last role there, I was heading the Offshore Development Center. As I say, I was the vice president there at a very young age. Never made to feel that I was a woman anywhere at all, which you would think normally when you think of Indian society in personal lives, etc. That wouldn't be the case. And I'm talking more than 25 years back here. So there I was kind of felt very comfortable. I never ever was made to feel that I was a woman in the sense that there was any disparity or anything. Second inning, I moved here in the Western world, which I would have thought would be more advanced and would be, especially for women.
Correct.
And it was the other way around. So in technical teams, first of all, I realized around me, I was normally the only woman in technology. And then even if there were some women, I was the only brown woman. So that was kind of shocking to me. And I mean, again, we can go into details in a few examples, etc. But then I did feel I was made to feel I was a woman and a woman of color. So in short, I would say that.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think that is such a unique experience because from perception, and I think that's the problem when I talk about, whenever, even I'm guilty of it, when we've talked about on the podcast, you say women in data or, gender bias in data, but everyone has such a unique perception. And I think that intersectionality, everyone wants to connect to someone's experience, right? And to me, that is something that is, I'm sure you're not the first person to have experienced that, but to me, I would have looked at your experience and gone, oh, she might have felt like it was difficult for her to rise up the ranks in India, and here she might have had more freedom and her opinions may have been more respected as opposed to there. But that's so interesting. I mean, and you mentioned something really interesting about the subtle elements of racism and all of that, and then the more overt. Did you feel that was at the, now you're global head? I'm sure that happens, or I'm hoping it happens slightly less, because there's an authority bias that happens as well. And we all know that when you're in a position of authority, people tend to hopefully challenge you less or have a bit more respect. At what stage did you feel like it was more subtle, and what stage did you feel like it was just overtly in your face in England?
Honestly speaking, it wouldn't be a time or a phase, I can see it has gone down or up actually. So whether it is
Interesting.
leadership or non-leadership role, I mean, you would think maybe in leadership it becomes easier.
Yeah.
And again, as I say, it's not something very visible or anything. And again, I'm not pointing any particular organization or a particular group. And it's not something, it happens within the team. It could be around you and all of that. So in that sense, it has happened in various sort of, as I say, forms and shapes where this has come through. And in a subtle way, it has been there still, I would say. And I do feel we are in a transition phase. I have felt now women coming in lots of, senior positions and C-suite, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sure, 20 years later, when you were doing this same podcast, probably things would have changed drastically.
I hope, yeah.
And I do think we are in that transition phase where it's not that bad, but then we are still feeling those effects and the changing effects, etc. And unfortunately, we're still feeling those effects. But then 20 years later, I'm sure it is going, all in a positive direction, and people are feeling that we shouldn't be prejudiced. I was reading a quote yesterday that, prejudice doesn't help anyone, but it hurts everyone.
Right.
And that is so true, that people, if they realize that, then all of a sudden their perspectives will change.
Yeah, that's so incredible. I mean, in terms of your ethnic background, culture, family background as well. I know England now, and especially London. Let's be very clear. London is such a melting pot of different cultures and accepting. I think in a lot of respects. Of people coming from other countries. But 25 years back, that must have been quite a difficult challenge to navigate in terms of when we bring it back to data and this particular career and your second innings, as you say. Did you find the industry specifically challenging, or did you find England and London and culture here as a whole difficult to navigate?
Both, I would say. So, I mean, in terms of culture, you go out and the normal perception would have been, and so my husband it doesn't come from technical background.
Right, okay.
But then the general perception would be any technical folks would look at him and talk technical words, and then he would say, no, it's my wife who's technical. So
that must have felt so good.
Exactly. So that's one thing culturally, which I saw that I was completely... and I must say that I felt I was invisible when it comes to technology discussion.
Right.
People just thought, oh, it's my husband they should speak to, whereas it was just the opposite. And in those days, especially, normal culture was that Indian men, especially who were migrating here, were into technology field, and my husband was a very different person. He works with commodities trading firm, etc.
Okay.
So that was culturally. In terms of job market, I remember I took a break, so I think that became another added sort of challenge when I started to look for my first job. And very soon I realized that with all my credentials of, high positions and my degrees is not helping me at all. And I'll be transparent, for my first job, then I toned down my resume heavily. I removed my MBA degree, I removed my higher titles, etc. That's how I landed up having my first warm-up job, which is slightly strange for me to say, but that's how I got my first job, and I toned it down.
When you toned down your credentials.
Toned down.
Wow.
Normally people try to upmarket or add things to kind of sell them. And I was trying to literally in my interview trying to show that I wasn't that high flyer. I wasn't completely hid my master's degree and all of that. So yeah, it is funny I landed into that, but then that was just a little phase. And I would say that first warm-up job I really, really enjoyed. And to be very honest, that was something, as Steve Jobs says, when you look back and connect the dots, then it all comes together.
Yeah.
And although that was my warm-up job, but that was the first official exposure to data, actually. So that made me feel, and sometimes you don't realize what your potential is. I've been in technology field. I had been, working in tech field for many, many years. What I didn't realize that I had the knack for numbers. I had the knack for data very strongly. And that sort of, that was a company I had never worked in that domain as well. It was supplied to construction industry.
Oh, wow.
Talking about bricks and aggregates and concrete and all of that. And it was all, data around that. So really enjoyed because that's something I really almost found my passion, that this is something I want to work with.
That's it. Yeah, that's incredible, because one of my questions was, how did you get your start? Have you always been passionate about data? You've just said it, that you've just had the knack and then you found the passion along the way.
Exactly. So that's something I realized, and as I say, I'm thankful when I look back that was the job I did. And then when I joined my first pharmaceuticals, although it wasn't the data role, I started with digital in terms of creating mobile sites for healthcare professionals, mobile apps and websites and all of that. But then as soon as I got the opportunity of data, and I realized, for example, we had licenses for, in those days, ClickView was the technology which was lying dormant, nobody was using it. So I started to use it myself, actually. So I was the first person probably in the organization who started to use, otherwise data was nowhere in picture. And that sort of, took me to a journey where there was a regional representation they wanted from a country, from data perspective, and I was the first one to raise my hand. And probably nobody also wanted in those days, looking back, probably data was considered a bit nerdy subject as well, which I think has come long way back now with the AI and Gen AI. Now data teams are no more very nerdy.
Correct. You're cool almost.
You're
if
cool,
you know how to
basically.
use ChatGPT, you're
Exactly.
you're a very cool person.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, in short, I would say that's how I found the passion. And then again, I was fortunate enough to get into a role where I could transition from digital into data. So I made a decision that this is the area I want to stick to.
That's amazing. Wow. I mean, it's funny and it's not funny, but everyone that I've spoken to has almost a variation of that same story of how they came into data and technology. It's never like, oh, I grew up knowing that tech was something that I was really interested. It just, there's never any stories like that. It's really interesting. But I think, like you said, 20 years on, I'm sure that there will be children now, hopefully, who have that exposure to technology early and just know right off the bat that they have a knack for it. They're really interested in it. And I think that's what's going to push things forward as well, is you get these 13-year-old kids who can code and program and do all this stuff, and it's incredible to see.
Yes, it is difficult to see. I mean, how rapidly things are changing, and this generation is getting exposed to AI-based tools without knowing them. I mean, they use Google Maps. I mean, we used to ask people to go to places, and
I remember the AA maps
Exactly.
and my mum drawing lines in the maps to try and
taking
find it.
printouts
Yes.
and all of that.
Oh god, the A and route finder printouts. Yes.
And all of that. And we used to think that was cool. And now we are so dependent on Google Maps,
Oh, God,
etc.
absolutely.
So yeah, things are changing rapidly, and then careers are evolving as well based on that. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess in terms of, we've talked about your intersectionality, your own experiences, some of the barriers that you've had. Were there any lessons that you learned along the way in terms of how to overcome them, how to become, when you can't change the system, you become resilient towards it? Anything of that nature that you just learned how to deal with it over time?
One thing, I mean, again, and I know it may be a sad thing to say, but then acceptance is first thing. You really need to be aware of the fact that it could come in any form and shape without you realizing it. And it may be a shock to you, it may not be a shock to you, you may be expecting it. So be ready, and be ready to accept it, in the sense that it doesn't deter you. It doesn't affect you negatively. So you should be ready to kind of, find this is something I was expecting or not expecting. It has happened. Think about it, reflect on it, but then move on. So that's something you need to be aware of, rather than, oh my God, this is what has happened and I'm feeling bad and I'm feeling sad and all of that. So I think that's something which I've learned, that's something which you just need to accept, first of all. The second thing, I know I've spoken to many people, they say that you should be vocal about it and you should say things about it. My second thing is, yes, you should where possible, but not every time everyone will understand, because then, you may want to go to, let's assume, another senior person or another person from HR, etc. Sometimes it's so subtle that it's very difficult to articulate.
Yeah.
So again, in that sense, you choose your battles.
Yeah.
Which one do you want to really pick up on? Again, I'm not trying to say that you sort of take yourselves, back, but then speak where possible, and you should definitely speak, but then where it is not, I would say move on and just take it as lesson learned, and then, don't let it come again if where possible. Yeah.
Right. And I'm far more less accomplished than you in terms of my career at this stage. However, I've also noticed myself doing that, and I think that ability, be vocal where you can. And I think peer-to-peer relationships, it's easier to call someone out. When it comes from a senior level and you're at a junior level, it does become more of a I don't want to be seen as a troublemaker or calling out anything and everything.
Yeah.
And I think picking the battle that you can make a difference on.
Yeah.
Don't stay silent about everything, but I think that's a really fair and very real way of talking about it, because everyone's like, make noise, do whatever you can to, change the system. It's sometimes about understanding what things you have the power to make a difference to.
True. You can't boil the ocean. I mean, that's the fact, actually. And then just to build on that, I would say that, yes, you should say, but then when when you progress in your career, just remind yourself that you don't want to be a leader like that. You want to be an inclusive leader. Doesn't matter if things happen with you, or I'm going to do the same with my team, or something like that. So just just try to learn that I don't want to be a leader like that.
Yeah.
And then move on and try to become a leader who's inclusive. Nowadays, everybody is smart. So there's nothing hidden from anybody. So if you're really fair, people know it. Not just kind of, you just can't keep sending emails on equity and diversity, etc., and then not be doing it.
Yeah.
People notice that very clearly. So be a good leader, be an inclusive leader, and people will notice it.
Yeah, and I know you, of course, are very passionate about helping the future generations of being that inclusive leader. Do you mind speaking a little bit about maybe what got you into that, some of the things that you're doing to be that inclusive leader, especially coming from such an unique intersectional background?
Sure. So I'm really passionate about women, especially young women.
Yeah.
Being excelling in the industry. First of all, in my day-to-day life, if I see especially a young woman in a call, and if she hasn't spoken for a few minutes, I make sure I sort of politely, without kind of putting her on spot,
Yeah.
just kind of taking her opinion, because this generation is pretty smart, but then it should not be now different ageism I should be bringing, at least if not sexism or anything else. So
Right.
I try to make sure that I ask. In terms of formal groups, I do some mentorship for women and girls outside. So I had volunteered for various mentorship programs
Yeah.
where these girls and women approach me, and I talk to them, and I try to guide them how to navigate the system, how to be able to articulate what they have. And that's something which I think, especially I've noticed with women of color, they do a lot, but they do not articulate what they do. And that's something they really need to add as a skill. And the second thing, which I keep telling my team as well, that serving mentality needs to be changed to partnership mentality.
Right.
So don't just become, especially in data field, traditionally, somebody will come to me and I will do my data crunching and hand it over to you. So you're always in that reactive mode. So what I tell the teams, that be a partner. Your body language, when you're sitting on the table, you are your subject matter experts.
Yeah.
So try to be a partner, and that's when people respect you. Otherwise,
Yes.
you will always remain a serving person. Last but not the least, there are some groups where we help, including myself, any challenges with senior leadership which women face, and those are different kind of challenges. As you said, it may look like there are no challenges, but there are probably different kind of challenges.
Right.
So those are the forums where we help each other.
Yeah.
In terms of looking into the challenges, etc. There is a group we meet twice a month where there are women, there are data leaders in the US and in the UK, where we meet each other. And that really helps in endorsing the fact that it's not just me, because half the time we think, was it just me? It
Yes.
happened with me. And then that's you realize it has happened with so many women, and then we learn from each other. And at least just the fact knowing that we all are on the same journey really helps.
Yeah, God, all of those points I agree with. Absolutely. I mean, that's a lot to take on as well as your day job, but I think that you've made it such an ingrained part of your day to day. It probably doesn't feel like so much extra work. And I think what I just noticed about when you were talking was just, it's so normalized for you. It's not like, oh, in addition to what I'm doing, I'm also setting up this and working groups and da-da-da. It was very like, this is just part of the day-to-day, and it should be a part of the day-to-day, because like we were saying about intersectionality at the beginning, although women share an experience as a gender, we all have very different nuanced ways of perceiving things. Some people may shout louder than others. Some people, may come from different cultural backgrounds or have moved from different countries and have faced different challenges. So there needs to be that open forum to just respect where everyone's coming from. And I love that thing about calling, because I see so little of that, and I can call it out as well. I've been on meetings where this is not to bash anything, but I've set up the meeting, I've had the previous engagements with the client, I've done all of the sort of preamble and getting them to understand that this is a solutionized based approach and a partnership that we're working on. You get on the call, it's you and 15 older white males, or older males in general, and they're all talking to each other as if they've proposed that same solution, and you don't get a look in. And if someone just had the sort of knack to just go, oh, she hasn't spoken in a while. What do you think about that? Thanks for sending over the proposal. Actually, I have a couple of questions on this.
Can't agree more, actually, and it has to be day to day. And I don't know whether you've seen one of the Simon Sinek's
Yes, yeah.
things where he says that this day to day thing, it's almost like brushing your teeth to 2 minutes every day without realizing your teeth are healthy. And same thing with so many things. You don't become a leader by just doing a course. It's almost like learning and implementing it in day to day life. So if you see a girl is being interrupted in a meeting, try to interrupt the person, actually. So be a leader, noticing those kind of little nuances, not just kind of, yes, it is a work meeting, and talk to the person who's being the loudest and the most vocal person in the team. So try to equalize things, and especially, as you say, if a woman has kind of put effort, and that's what, exactly as you were mentioning, there are so many cases which I could quote, and I've seen a lot of women where they do all the background work,
Yes.
all the hard work, bring it to a place, and all of a sudden somebody comes and just take it with such an ease, without even realizing it. And it's so difficult for you to mention that to anybody. That's
Exactly.
another thing. So we need to make sure as leaders that let's not normalize it, let's call it out where possible.
Yeah, and I think that I always say it, when you're in a position to do something, you should do something.
Yes,
Because
yeah.
I also get the difficulty, especially if you come as a woman or a woman of color or a woman who's less abled. You already feel like you're dealing with so many challenges. So to vocalize extra challenges feels like such an arduous thing. Whereas that 2-second interruption that you make to actually make someone feel seen and heard makes all the world of difference, so that they don't have to continuously take that baggage on of addressing it and being formal and can we have a meeting and can we talk about this? It's just
Yeah, 100%.
a simple thing. And I do want to sort of, I guess, bring it back to the data, because I've got a couple of reports from McKinsey that I wanted to highlight and then get your thoughts on. So McKinsey and Company's obviously been producing their Women in the Workplace report, which they conduct in partnership with leanin.org. And the report provides an intersectional look at the specific biases and barriers faced by Asian, Black, Latina, and LGBTQ plus women and women with disabilities. So they're quite an extensive report. So they surveyed more than 27,000 employees and 270 senior HR leaders. Now, I've got a whole list of different things that were tested, that were hypothesized. But if you take sort of a microaggression like needing to provide more evidence of your competence than others do, as just a singular example, only 29% of white women reported this, and this is what I mean about women's experiences, compared to 42% of Black women and 36% of Asian women. But again, it's having people feel comfortable enough to raise it in a very calm way, because again, it's that fine balance between a lot of people, if we assume that most people are doing things out of unconscious bias rather than prejudice for the larger parts. Of course, there are ingrained prejudices, and we can, I'm sure everyone's faced that to some degree in their life at some point. But if we assume that the majority of people are just conditioned over their various environments and circumstances to be that way, we also need to feel comfortable to just be just bringing it to their attention. They can then it's conscious, and then they can make the decision to do with with that information what they will. But it sometimes I do struggle with that in terms of intersectionality, and everyone's experience is so unique. So you can't assume that other people can relate to it or understand it.
Yeah.
And
And maybe I want to give an example of my bias as well, actually,
Right,
here,
okay.
because I know I'm talking that, I have been a victim of the bias,
Yes.
but then I'll give you my own example of unconscious bias, which I noticed myself. So in India, that we get help for everything. So I never got
Yes.
to do any of these DIY stuff and
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah.
And when we came to this country, we realized that people paint their walls themselves, which we had never done in
Yeah.
India. And my husband and we got excited that we want to do a character wall and
Right,
this
feature
thing
wall.
and feature wall
Yeah.
and all of that. So we decided we'll do that. And it is funny, we go to this store and we standing as so we ask people that we want to paint a wall. What do we buy?
Oh
So they
my
were
God.
looking at us
Oh my
as
gosh.
if so because we didn't know anything at all.
Yeah.
So anyhow, so what happened was when we were talking about what somebody said, you need brushes, you need paint, you need tape, and all of that, and we were looking for people, and somehow there was a woman
Yeah.
helper standing there, but I looked for a man help for that, and my husband made me realize that, and then I all of a sudden realized that why did I do that? I mean, why did I assume that she would not know about all of
Right.
that? And then I actually went back to her, and I tell you, she was the most helpful person ever. The way she explained, the way she helped, and that's what happens in work life as well. The way
Yeah.
women help you, it is
Above and
beyond,
beyond.
above and beyond. So
Correct.
that was my own bias, which I didn't realize myself. So again, it's self-correction when you realize that has happened.
Yeah.
So we all have that. We need to realize that.
Absolutely. Actually, that's and obviously that experience has stayed with you because it was how many years
Yes.
back, and I think that's important is when you give people the respect of, taking them for their experience and who they are and what they can bring to the table rather than all the other things that you think make them up.
Yeah.
It actually allows you to be really pleasantly surprised by a lot of people.
Exactly.
And I always feel like, as a woman of color, sometimes you have to shout louder, you have to work harder, you have to be more visible, be more present, be more above and beyond and everything to even get that recognition that I think other people just maybe assume that this is going to happen. Like
Yeah.
if I do the work, if I put in the time, I will move up the ladder. It's a given.
Yeah.
Whereas for others, it's maybe not the same experience. I also wanted to talk about, I guess, the effect of the progression barriers, if we're talking specifically about progression as well, is the McKinsey Institute actually did another report, which was race in the UK workplace and the intersectional experience. And they found that Black, Bangladeshi and Pakistani groups in the UK were the furthest behind on pay and labour force participation. And UK companies struggle to simultaneously achieve gender in ethnic diversity, in both gender and ethnic diversity. Do you feel like in your years, there's one agenda push more than the other, or it is difficult to achieve, an equal footing on both? Are the two able to be tackled together, or do you feel gender's one corner, ethnic and disability, these are all separate subsectors?
I would say either ways. I mean, it can be together, it can be in parallel, because it could be that, for example, as I was talking about the women part, I think that is changing rapidly with women coming into C-suite. It may not be brown women all the way, but then at least that women barrier is something which I feel is rapidly changing.
Yeah.
Whereas when it comes to ethnic, I think it is not that fast. So it is an imbalance. So maybe as a woman, I see the progression, but then as an ethnic woman, I do not see the same progression.
Yeah.
So I may probably lag behind as compared to a white woman. That is fine, but at least as a woman, I'm not kind of facing a double-edged sword there.
Yeah.
That that's something which impacts. So to me, it is fine. Of course, if it is happening with ethnic women, and that's where probably as a brown woman myself and my peers who I'm talking to, we have more responsibility to kind of make sure the younger generation will not face that, or at least share very transparently our experiences,
Right.
those little experiences, not just kind of very visible ones, with them, so that they do not face exactly the same, or at least they can prevent that happening. So that is something which makes us more responsible. So as you say, I mean, again, these could run in parallel. We cannot wait for one or the other to happen.
Yeah,
I would
absolutely.
say. Yeah.
I think that is such a valid point, that actually now you're looking at it. Yeah, I do feel like the barriers to women being in leadership positions,
Yeah.
you see more and more of it happening, and it's very normalized. I don't think
Yeah.
anyone really makes as much of a song and dance, but I do think that we are lagging behind there.
Yeah.
I guess after looking at all that data, after hearing your experiences, I'd be interested to know, do you think people understand the intersectionality impact? Like, do you think people actually, because this is just me being very honest, I feel like sometimes, because everything is so vocalized now, we talk about the LGBTQ community, we talk about so many marginalized elements of society, and intersectionality is an element of it. But I, like you said, you didn't know about it until 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't really know about it until maybe a year or so ago. Do you think that is something that is discussed enough? Do you feel like it is something that people are aware of at all?
I would say the other way around. Probably the discussions have kind of exploded to an extent that it has diluted the real effort. And I'm being transparent there. What I feel is that equity and diversity has become the thing in black and white everybody needs to follow. And I'm not saying, the organizations I have worked with, they have followed.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to day-to-day life, it can be sometimes on paper, whereas it doesn't reflect in actions, which is happening, but it hasn't happened fully yet. And as you say, because there are so many areas it has come around, sometimes it becomes diluted.
Yeah.
So as you say, disability could be another area, or so many other areas which we need focus on. So I would not say that this kind of intersectionality is discussed so much in detail.
Yeah.
So gender is something which is probably something people do sort of realize whether or not they're doing something about it.
Yeah.
But anything else, I think, becomes kind of another layer of discussion.
Absolutely, because I think when that's what I've noticed personally as well, because gender is very easy because it's black and white. It's in obviously there's the LGBT community and people who identify as different genders, of course, but in people's forefront of people's mind, gender is a very easy issue because it is quite this and that. Whereas I think the layers of intersectionality that fall into so many different categories, I just think that maybe the reason it's not talked about, and I don't want to be so negative on the podcast. I genuinely think sometimes it's because it is overwhelming when you put the umbrella of DE&I over everything, and then there's so many different subsectors of that. It does become quite difficult to tackle everything at once, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, as I was saying, that let's kind of take one thing at a time. We cannot expect from the society to have acted upon everything else. Then it'll be a fair world in no time.
Yeah.
And we don't live in fair world. We all know that.
Yeah.
So just embrace the journey. I mean, that's the thing. Again, there will be ups and downs, and there will be hurts along the way.
Yeah.
When you see a leader or a woman with color leader, you think, oh, her journey would have been easy. She's just kind of, if you see on LinkedIn or their resumes, you feel, oh my God, what a journey.
That's what I felt when I looked at yours. I was like, oh my God, what a journey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then when you see the kind of obstacles, the hurdles, and the kind of small challenges, big challenges which they have faced, as compared to maybe a white male where they would have had sponsors where they shake hands in a conference, have a drink, and then there you go, they're offered a job. Whereas with the woman, first of all, they do not ask. And when they ask, they could be classed as maybe arrogant or something of. So it's a different kind of challenge. The same confidence which you expect from a man, but if a woman comes with the same confidence, you kind of think of them differently as well. So it's very different categories still. We measure men and women.
Yeah.
So sense of humor with men is different. Sense of humor with women is different. So in that sense, I think women do face challenges in day-to-day life in terms of how they communicate, how they come across in meetings or in general conversations.
Absolutely.
And then it's just a norm. For example, I know people were saying, women leaders are asked the question, oh, you have children, how do you manage it all? But then why wouldn't you ask the same question from men, right?
It's one of the things that bugs me the absolute most.
Exactly. And initial days, because when I started my global roles, when I started to travel, I remember somebody asking, so who does the cooking at home, when you travel? So imagine those kind of questions, which nobody would have asked my husband. So those kind of things, come in very, very subtle forms.
Yeah, it's subtle, but it's just, oh God, if you could just hear, if you play yourself back saying that.
Yes.
You've said it to me right now. My first reaction was to roll my eyes and go, oh, for God's sake, really? But people just, it's the biases that come into play of all that. And it's, it's a really interesting perspective to have on it. But honestly, I guess I've covered all of the topics that I want to with you today. I think this has been such a fantastic episode. I've learned so much, and you've obviously had the most incredible journey, but there's been highs and lows. And I think your particular intersectional, unique experience of coming from two different countries and backgrounds and having to adapt and assimilate, etc. It's really refreshing to hear that your journey's also not been completely perfect, and I'll be completely honest with saying with that, because if you look at your resume, my mouth was open thinking, oh God, this is amazing. But I think people will really resonate with it, which is an incredible thing to have. And I would like to encourage people to also form groups and to build mechanisms like Neeraj has done in their own organizations, because it's just such a normal part of your vocabulary, which I would really love to see it become in other organizations. I guess before we end, any advice for someone in a leadership role who is trying to incorporate more of an inclusive environment into their office practices?
The only thing I would say is that just tried to change one life, and if you've helped one person or one woman of color, help navigate into her career progression, that's worth it, I would say. And of course, if you multiply that with number of women leaders, we would have made a huge impact. So I think, don't think that sitting here just complain about things. We all have the responsibility to do something about it as well, and let's do those little things to help the society.
Absolutely. Well, that was so inspiring. So I just thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and you've been an absolute pleasure to have on.
Thank you, Rakhi. You were absolutely amazing in asking the
Oh,
questions.
thank you. Well, I think, listeners, this brings me on to probably my my last note for everyone, is that this, unfortunately, is my last podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. I cannot tell you, it's been me living out my journalistic dreams from childhood. I always wanted to be a TV presenter, and somehow I wound up at a data consultancy. But it's been the absolute pleasure of my career to do this. And Neeraj, you've been a fantastic final guest for me. So
I feel more privileged actually now, because it was your last podcast, and I hope you continue in some form in your next role as well.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you for all the amazing guests that I've had and the conversations I've had along the way. It's been an incredible highlight of my entire career. So signing off for the final time, this is Rakhi Sharma for Diversifying Data. Thank you.